Hello everyone, welcome to my kitchen. My name is Michael and today we're going to be making bread and butter pickles, and also we're going to be canning them to make them shelf stable. So stay with me and let's get started with this. So my original recipe, I just wanted to make a small batch for you today to show you how to do that. So I'm going to take my original recipe and I'm going to cut it in half. So this is 2 pounds of cucumbers, and I've got the little ones here and I've given these a good wash. You don't want the really big ones because the really big ones, as you know, if you cut into them, are very seedy in the middle and you won't get a lot of pickle. The smaller ones like this make great crispy pickles. Even the English cucumbers that you get that are a little bit longer, they would be better than the traditional, the wax ones, as I call them. So definitely you want to get smaller, the better. That way you don't have all that seeds in the middle of them. And like I said, this is 2 pounds. So let's get started processing these. And what we're going to do with these is you want to make sure you tape both ends of these off. Where the bloom is an enzyme in that which they say makes the pickle not stay crisp when it's processed. So we want to definitely take those off. So just take just the end of it off. You don't have to take a lot of it off. And then you can cut these as thick or as thin as you like. You can see here on this one, there's not a lot of seeds in them, so the smaller the better that they are. So you can take these down to about 1/4 of an inch. And you can see what those look like there. Those are nicely thinned, sliced. If you like a thicker sliced pickle, that is the one thing about making them at home, is you control the size of how you want the pickles. If you want them thin, you can make them thin. If you want to make them thicker, you can have thicker ones. So I'm going to continue to work on these. And again, we'll take the ends off both sides and cut these down, and I'll be back in just a few minutes. All right, we've got our cucumbers moved to our container now, and let's move on. So I've got an onion here that I've got. So if you look at some of the processed jars that you can get in the store, some of them will say onion flakes, some of them say onion powder, but we're going to be using onion here. And so looking at what my batch is here, I'm going to kind of base it on what this is. So I'm going to start out by cutting this in quarters. I'm going to cut the top and the root end off of it. And then I'm going to make a slice down one side, and we'll take that outer skin off of it. All right, now that we've got that outer skin removed, I'm going to go ahead and cut this in quarters. And we're going to take a look at that. So now that we've got that like that, make sure you protect your fingers here, and we're just going to slice this back like this. When you get down to a certain point, you can turn the onion on its side there and continue cutting in the other direction. And then you can take your onions and look at them to see. If you want them smaller, you can definitely take them and cut them in half again, because remember, our cucumbers here are relatively small. So if you want to, again, cut them into a half and get smaller pieces, you can definitely do that. So I'm going to actually do that to these. I'm going to cut these again in half. And this is personal preference, however you like them. And we're going to add those to our mixture. And normally in a full batch, I would add a whole onion. So I'm going to look at this and see, because depending on how big your onion is, if you get a small, medium, or large, you don't want to overpower your pickle. So this is about the cucumbers and the pickles today. And the onion is going to be an added flavor to it. So let's do that again, and then we'll take another look at it, and we'll add some more into it. I'm going to go ahead and add all of it. And I think I'm going to be happy with the half that I've got here. Again, this is personal preference. If you like the onion in your pickles, you can definitely do that. Let's mix this around. I think that looks good on where I'm going to go with those. So I'm going to go with half of this medium onion that I've got here. We put this other to the side. Let's continue on now. So we've got our onions and our cucumbers here together in my container, and I'm going to go ahead and add some bell pepper. This is completely optional if you don't want to add this in it. Typically the ones you see in the store don't have these in them, but I like the extra little bit of color that the bell pepper adds to it. And so I've got a red one and a yellow one here. If you want to use the orange one, you can. The green one would definitely blend in with the cucumbers, and you would notice it in there. But if you're looking for the color, then you might want to try one of these red ones, orange ones, or one of the yellow ones. But definitely, if you don't like the bell pepper, you can leave this out. If at this point you think you might like a little bit of spice to your bread and butter pickles, then you might want to add a little bit of jalapeno to it, or a little bit of spicy flavorings or seasonings to that. You can definitely do that at this point if you want to add just a little bit of heat to it. I think based on what I've got here, I'm going to put the smaller one of these two in it. So I'm going to cut this red one up, and we'll put this yellow one to the side, and we'll use that for something else. So I've given this a good wash, and I'm going to take the bottom off of it here. And I'm going to take the top of it off here. And I'm going to run down the outside of it. And that just kind of gets the core by doing that out of the way, and you don't have to worry about cleaning a lot of these splines that I have off here. So I'm going to go ahead and give those a little bit of a trim to get some of that off. All right, we've got everything cleaned up now, and these will pickle up nicely too, along with those onions on those. So we want to cut these into small pieces, and definitely if you want to cut them in half again, like we did our onions, that way you've got smaller pieces, or you can actually cut them into like little bite-sized pieces. It's completely up to you. This is your recipe, how you want to do it. I'm going to cut these in half, but definitely if you want to cut them down into smaller pieces like that, you can definitely put the smaller pieces in it. And so let's go ahead and put just a few of these in. I think this whole bell pepper here will look nicely in this jar, so I'm going to continue to cut these up. All right, I've got my bell pepper cut up now, so let's add that to our mixture here. And let's give that a little toss through and see what we've got. I'm going to put the lid on this container and give this a little shake around. All right, so that looks pretty good. I think that's going to be really pretty in the jar. When we get these processed up, you'll see that a little bit of that red from that bell pepper in there, and that'll look really nice. We're now ready to move on to our salt. So I'm going to be using canning and pickling salt. You definitely want to make sure that you get some type of salt that you've got, that the only ingredient in it is salt. Any of the other processed salts that you get in the store, some of those have anti-caking agents in them, and it could do something to the way your pickles turn out as far as how they process. It could make the brine a little cloudy, and you definitely don't want that. So I've always used just the pickling and canning salt. The only ingredient in here is salt. So if you don't have this, just make sure that when you get your salt in the store, that the only ingredient in it is the salt in it. There's nothing else in it. So my original recipe had 1/3 cup of salt in it. So 1/2 of 1/3 cup is just a scant short of 1/4 cup, but really it is 2 tablespoons and 2 teaspoons. So 1/2 of 1/3 is 2 tablespoons plus 2 teaspoons, and that's what I've got on my salt here. And we're going to put that over the top of our cucumbers, onions, and pepper mixture. And we're going to get our clean hands and just go in there and just kind of move that around. If you want to put this into a bigger bowl to get this mixed in and make sure that it all gets mixed in, and then put it back in some kind of container, or you can leave it in that bowl and just put some cling film over the top of it, because we're going to let these sit in the refrigerator between 2 and 3 hours. And what this is going to do, the salt is going to extract some of the moisture from the cucumbers, from the onion, and from the bell pepper. So we want to make sure that we get a little bit of that salt on everything, and I'm going to put the lid back on it. And at this point, you can just come back and just give it a good shake around, just to make sure that we've got the salt covering all of your ingredients in there. All right, so I'm going to put this in the refrigerator between 2 and 3 hours. We're going to let some of that moisture come out of those with that salt, and we'll come back and I'll show you what's going to happen next. Stay with me. I am back and we're ready to move on with our bread and butter pickles. So I've got my cucumbers here with my onions and my bell peppers, and I wanted to show you what that looked like. And you can see they've actually sweated out a lot of moisture in those. So I'm going to pour that into this colander here, but take a look at how much liquid has come out of that. That is quite a bit. So I'm going to take this to the sink and I'm going to give these a good rinse. This is a personal preference. If you want to leave the salt on it, you most certainly can. I'm going to rinse these off, and I'll be back and we're going to dispose of the water that come out of here as well. So I'll be back in just a minute. All right, I've given my vegetables here a good rinse and we're ready to move on. We'll set these aside and we're going to go ahead and start with our jars. So today I'm going to be using pint jars with these, and wide mouth jars make the best because it's easier to put the cucumbers and things down in there for the pickles. So I prefer the wide mouth jars the best. So I've got 6 of them here. In case I don't use all of them, I got a couple extra just in case, depending on how much ingredients you've got in there. So depending on how much onion, how much bell pepper you put in it, or any other things that you put in it, you definitely want to have an extra jar or two, just in case you have a little bit more than what's going to happen. So I've got my lids here in a little a bath of water. I'm going to bring this up to just a little bit higher than room temperature. You don't have to do that if you don't want to. I've got them in here just to keep them clean. I've got my rings here ready to go. I've got my water bath canner. So with your jars, you want to make sure that they're really clean. I've cleaned these out. You can either run them through the dishwasher or you can wash them by hand with soap and water. We're going to turn them upside right and we're going to put them into our canner. You want to make sure that you've got a rack or something that's in the bottom of the canner, just in case there's any bubbles that come up around it You don't want these turning over and breaking inside your canner. So now that I've got my jars down into my water bath canner, I've got just regular water here, and I'm going to take and I'm going to fill each one of the jars up until it's overflowing. And that way, when I get ready to fill up the whole water bath canner with water, my jars won't float around. And they're weighted down with the water that's inside of it. All right, now that I've got my jars filled up with water, I'm going to fill up the canister with the rest of the water here, and to continue filling it up, I want a 1 to 2 inch headspace above the top of the jars is where I want this to be. I'm going to put this on the stove, put the lid on it, and bring it up. It doesn't need to come up to a boil. It just needs to come up just less than that. We want to have some hot jars so that when we get ready to put our hot ingredients in it, we don't shock the jar. So I'm going to move these to the stove, finish filling this up. Again, remember, 1 to 2 inches is what you want above the top of the jar of water. And you'll need that in there also when you get ready to can. So once we get all of our food and our cans and our lids on, you put them back into our water bath canner, you want that 1 to 2 inch space above the jars so the jars can process. I've got my jars on the stove now, my water bath canner with the lid on them, and it is turned up now. We're going to wait for that to come up to a temperature. Like I said, we do not want those boiling, so just under that is where we want those. So I've got my lids now in this pan, and I'm going to put those on the stove. I'm going to turn those down on low. I just want those just to come up to just a little bit above room temperature, and then I will turn those off. So I'm going to go put these on the stove now. Now we're ready to start with our other ingredients. I've got a Dutch oven here with high walls on it. I'm going to go ahead and start heating this up. All right, I've got my eye here turned up high as it will go, and we will get started with that. So if you're doing it on your stove, you definitely want this on high to do that. So we're going to be talking about our vinegar. So I've got 1.5 cups of vinegar, and the recipe says that the vinegar needs to be diluted to a minimum of 5%. You do not want to get a vinegar that's less than that because it could compromise the canning process and the stability of the food. So you can go higher if you want, but do not go any lower than 5% on your vinegar solution. This is what this one has been dilated to. This is 1.5 cups of white vinegar at 5%. We'll go ahead and put this into our pot. I've got 1 cup of sugar. We're going to go ahead and add that in. I've got 1 tablespoon of mustard seeds. We'll add those in. I've got 1 teaspoon of celery seeds. I've got 1 teaspoon of turmeric, and that's going to give that yellow color that you typically see in your bread and butter pickles, and it also add a little bit of flavor also. I've got 1/2 teaspoon of whole black peppercorns and 1/2 teaspoon of whole cloves. And give this a good stir, and we'll make sure this is all mixed together and that the sugar is dissolved. So one thing that I like about making pickles at home is you can control what you've got in them. And a lot of the pickles that you see in the store have high fructose corn syrup in them. So if you're trying to get away from that, definitely you can make these at home and put in the different sweeteners and try different ones. So this is going to come up to a boil. Now that that's come up to a boil, let's take our cucumbers and put those in. We'll give this a good mix through and bring it up to a boil. All right, my solution is coming up to a boil. I can see just around the edges here that it's getting ready to start to boil, and I'm going to turn off the heat, and these are now ready to go into our jars. So I'm going to get everything set up for that, and we will go ahead and get this process moving onto our jars. We've got our jars heated up now, and I did empty the water out of them, and I do have one of these tools to help with the jar lifter here to get these out. I do not recommend using tongs, as the jar could slip on it, it could break, you could get hurt. The food inside of it is going to be really hot once we start putting these in there. The jars are really hot, so it's better if you've got one of these jar lifters. This one is spring-loaded, and I really like this one. So I'm going to get the rest of my jars out of my water, and we're going to go ahead and start loading these up. I'm going to start with 3 jars, and I'm going to leave the other 3 in the water bath canner, and as I need them, I'll pull them out. But my next thing here is optional. This is pickle crisp, and I'm going to put this in the bottom of each one of the jars. All we need of this is 1/8 teaspoon. This is completely optional if you don't want to put this in there, but it does, I think, help make the pickles stay a little bit crisper. So we'll just put just 1/8 teaspoon in each one of our jars. You don't want to put it into the mixture because you don't know at that point if the jars will get enough of the mixture in it to make your pickles stay fresh and crispy. I've got my funnel here, and remember, this is the one that I have here that has the headspace on these. When we fill our jars up, we want 1/2 inch headspace on those. If you don't have one of those funnels and you've got one of these regular ones, you can definitely use the debubbler or this other tool here where you can measure down to get a half a space, a head space on those to see where that is. So both of those tools come in handy really nicely, and we want everything to be as clean as we can get it. So at this point, I'm gonna start loading my food in there. I'm gonna leave the liquid behind, and I'm gonna pack my food down in it that way. All right, so I've got my cucumbers and mixture in my jar, and I've got it just right to the bottom of where this bottom lip is here on this part of it. So I'm going to go ahead and load the other two here, and then we'll add our liquid to it last. All right, I've got my jars filled up now, ready to go. And so I've got 3 of those. Typically when I make a full batch, I can get 6 to 7 out of there. So I've got 3 with the batch that I've got today. And now let's go ahead and put our liquid into our containers. We want to bring that up a ½ inch from the top. So if I use my gauge, it's about where this is right here. So that's the headspace that we want on that. So I'm going to fill my jars up with my brine. All right, now that I've got my brine solution in my jars, I'm going to take my debubbler. Now we want to make sure that we don't have any air pockets in there, because if you leave the air pockets in there when we process them, it could change the level at which your food is. So we'll take the back of our debubbler here and we're going to run it down in there. But again, to test that, we want a ½ inch, and we can see that that's where our food is with those. So definitely check that to make sure that you've got enough liquid in there. So let's just run this down into the side of it. We want to make sure we get any air pockets out of it that might be trapped down in it, and we're going to do that with all 3 of these. All right, I'm going to put just a little bit more in these 2 to kind of bring those up just a little bit more there. We've got our jars filled up now, and I'm going to go ahead and take a clean paper towel here, and I've got some white vinegar, and I'm just going to take that and give that just a little bit of a clean around. Make sure we don't get any of that sticky brine on the lid there, because we want a really good seal with our lid. So that's just another way to check to see if you've got any cracks or any chips and things on your top of your jars here. We'll take our magnet lifter here for our jar lid lifter, and we'll take that and we will put that on our jar. Bring over the lid. And we want this to be fingertip tight. Just as you put the ring on there, when it stopped, just give it one little quick. That's fingertip tight. That is as much as you want of that. I've gone ahead and removed the other jars out of my canner, and I will go ahead and get these other 3 lids cleaned off on these and get these ready to go as well. All right, we're ready to put these back into our canner now, and remember, you want 1 to 2 inches of water above the jars. So if you measured that before you put the empty jars in there, you should have exactly what you've got there. And we'll go ahead and drop these in. And I'll be right back and tell you just a little bit more about the canning process. All right, I've got my jars in my water bath canner, and we're waiting for those to come up to a boil. Once those come up to a rigorous boil, we will set a timer for 10 minutes. We'll let them boil for 10 minutes, and then we'll turn the heat off, take the lid off, and let them rest in the hot water for another 5 minutes. So this is very important. I'm at 1,000 feet where I'm at now. So different processing times based on what elevation you are. And I'll put a link in the description box of the current altitudes and processing times. If you're looking at this in the future, definitely check to make sure that those numbers are still correct, because things change over time. And as of the date of this publishing of this video, this is the latest information that I've got. So I'm at 1,000 feet. My processing time on mine is 10 minutes. And then I will turn off the flame, I'll let them rest in the hot water for 5 and take them out. If you don't want to can your pickles, then you are done at this point. Once you've got your jars sealed up, you can put those in the refrigerator, and I would let them sit in the refrigerator for a couple of days, and that way they'll be nice and tangy and sweet for your bread and butter pickles, and they'll be ready to eat that way. If you wanted to can them, then we'll continue on with the process that I've got here. We're waiting for the water to come up to a boil, and we'll be ready to show you what these look like. I'm going to go ahead and clean the rest of this up, and I'll be back in just a minute. I am back, and I've got my bread and butter pickles out of the water bath canner, and they're sitting here on this rack, going to be cooling down. We're waiting for that infamous ping that we're going to hear from our jar lids when they seal. You want to put these someplace that they're not going to be disturbed and nobody is going to touch them, because as you can see here, there's a lot of steam coming off of them. They have been boiling and boiling hot water. So you definitely want to put these someplace that they're not going to be messed with, and you need to let these sit for 24 hours so they can cool down and make sure that they're going to seal. So once they seal, I've got one of my jars of strawberry jam here that I made. You want to remove the ring off the outside of it. And you can see that the dimple on the top of it has been depressed down. It does that automatically when it seals and the lid is on it. So you want to store these on your shelf with the rings off of them. And the reason for that is, just in case this lid, the chances of this coming undone are slim to none, but something could hit it or something and it could break the seal on it, even if you had the ring on it. And what you don't want to happen is you don't want to get a false seal again. So if you left the rings on it and that rubber part on the bottom of the lid there was still sticky, it might seal back down again. And it could, at that point, if it's been open and exposed to air and seal back down again, you might get mold or bacteria in it. We definitely don't want that. So store your jars on the can shelf with the rings off of them. We're going to let these sit here and wait for them to cool down. Again, put them someplace that they're not going to be touched for 24 hours. If after 24 hours and you've checked your pickles and you find that one of your jars has not sealed, then that one is still okay. Just take that one, put it in the refrigerator, and go ahead and eat that one right then. And when you're pulling them out of the canner, just pull them straight out of the canner, straight up. Don't tilt them or anything like that. And if there's any moisture on the top of them, they will evaporate very quickly. I can already tell these have already evaporated quite a bit while I've been standing here. So if you've never made bread and butter pickles before, take this recipe and try it. Make a small batch, and you can control what's in it. If you want more sugar in it, less sugar. If you want some more vegetables in it, if you want to put some garlic in it, however you want to. If you want to spice it up and put some jalapeños in it, you could definitely do that with them as well. It's completely up to you. And if you've never canned at all, I hope that you've taken some information from this and you can get you some canning supplies and start canning and pass that on to somebody else that you might know. If you like this content, don't forget to give it a thumbs up. I would really appreciate it. And maybe you might want to check out one of these other two videos over here. You might find something else you like. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. And I'll see you in my next video. And try these bread and butter pickles. I know you're going to love them. Bye-bye now.